a media authority has something to say about how disturbing the portrayal of a minor is, it's probably something to be really concerned about. And it felt a little bit one-dimensional. Friends, foes, hoes. Maybe you've seen my anime review before, maybe you haven't and should check it out. Let me sell you some anime now has a sequel that is this. Previously, I went through your Instagram suggestions and checked out a bunch of anime. I found some amazing titles that I shared in that video, and I also mentioned that there were some titles that weren't. Today we are gonna go through some of the titles that I didn't love as much. Just a disclaimer, these are all titles that people and teams have spent immense amounts of time and work on. This is in no way saying that the people that are doing this work are any less of artists or creatives than the people that make work that I enjoy. The anime titles that I'm going to talk about weren't really a great fit for me. If any of my reasons sort of make sense to you, then maybe there are other things that you can spend your time doing. Focus, please. Thank you. So the first anime that I didn't really enjoy was No Game, No Life. It was released in 2017 and a relatively new anime. If you've seen or heard of me speak about kaiju before, this anime is very similar in the sense that it is about games and probability also, which was why I thought I'd be into it. It starts off in our current world with a brother and sister team who are competitive gamers. They end up getting headhunted and transported to this parallel universe where everything is based off of games. So for example, if I wanted to buy fish from the market, I would wager that piece of fish in a game of tic-tac-toe. And they realize that there are different races and each of these races have different kingdoms. It all sounded pretty cool, which was why I was really interested. I also thought that out of the two main characters, the brother and the sister, the little sister was really cute. And this was made even better by how colourful and fast-paced the story was. The brother and sister end up teaming up with one of the princesses in this kingdom and making a lot of different allies on the way. This is where it gets a little bit weird. It's not unheard of for anime to be very flirtatious and very playful when it comes to the female body. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has seen slightly provocative but also very funny and personality-driven shots of high school girls with their skirts getting blown up. The weird thing for me was when this ended up becoming a thing for the character of the little sister. Bear in mind, she's only like 10 years old. We would have shots of her in a bathhouse getting her back scrubbed and these very sort of suggestive scenes. It kind of sat with me the wrong way. Being playful with the female form in animated mediums is completely fine. Male forms get played around with too. We see the objectifying of male characters in so many other shoujo manga and anime. It is the genre of anime or manga that is targeted towards young women, shoujo, young girl/woman. And shonen manga is manga that is targeted towards the young male demographic. Sho meaning young and then meaning boys or men. So example of shonen manga include Bleach, Naruto, Jujutsu Kaisen, action and thriller, sci-fi sort of genres. My only problem is when it becomes the objectifying of a child's body. It feels really strange to see these very sexual, suggestive scenes where you have this little girl who's only 10 years old being the object of a lot of people's fantasies. It's just, the writing wasn't bad. The games were very innovative and well designed. To top that off, the color scheme on this show was the color tones were just a little bit too much. There was just a little bit too much neon going on. It became very one-dimensional for me. I do watch a lot of this stuff later in the evening and I do have night mode on my screen, and the warm tones in the night mode on top of all those neon pinks and orange and corals, it was just a little bit too much for my eyes. There were even times where I found myself going for the dub version where they speak English instead of Japanese so that I can listen to this plot and writing that's amazing, but I can't really I can't really bring myself to stare at the screen because it just kind of hurts after a while. That in combination with the weird sister jokes just... The Media Classification Board of Australia actually has something to say about this anime. Depict in a way that is likely to cause offense to a reasonable adult, a person who is or appears to be a child under 18. If a media authority has something to say about how disturbing the portrayal of a minor is, it's probably something to be really concerned about. The next anime we have is Isekai Shokudou, otherwise known as Restaurant to Another World. It's about a restaurant with a door that actually takes you to different universes. The main character is a chef that owns the restaurant, and it revolves around different short stories on the door in the restaurant opening to different fantasy kingdoms and worlds. So you would have dragons come in, you would have elves come in, dwarves. Really cool stuff with heaps of potential to be really colourful and diverse. It ended up falling into a format where every episode would just be covering a different character entering the door. It was actually kind of heartwarming at first because you would have all these different people from medieval fantasy times coming into this restaurant and being served this semi-contemporary stuff that's a lot more tasteful and flavorful than what they would usually have. No way was this anime sexualized. Unlike other cooking anime counterparts like Shokugeki no Soma or Cooking Wars, where you would have characters reacting in very provocative ways when they actually tasted all this amazing food. My issue with this anime was that was it. There was nothing else. You would have characters come and go for 20 minutes at a time. So the episodes were 20 minutes long each, be broken down into 10-minute segments. You would see all these characters come and go for 10 minutes at a time and never come back, with the exception of maybe 2 characters. And I don't know if this is a very intentional choice on the writer's part. It feels like it gets to a very difficult place in terms of character development because there wasn't a lot of building on the owner's character or the waitresses in the restaurant. If you have only 10 minutes to tell a story of a character coming into a space, there's not a lot to go around. That wasn't a big win for me at all. I do like to get invested in the characters that I'm watching and how they grow and change over a slightly longer story arc, or at least some form of an underlying plot where you see them getting confronted by different obstacles or dealing with different conflicts, so that we can at least see a different dynamic to the character. And it felt a little bit one-dimensional. The soundtrack for this one really wasn't great at all. The opening song was extremely high-pitched even for anime standards, and I found myself just not really feeling it. Next up we have Yumeiro Patisserie. This is a baking anime about a young girl who is pretty much talentless and really clumsy. Sound familiar? In fact, she has a younger sister that is far more talented than she is, and she struggles with finding her place in the world and also her purpose in life. She ends up finding this purpose pretty quickly around the 2nd episode, and she meets a baker whose grandma used to bake with her grandma, and he ends up inviting her to come along to this very exclusive baking academy. She ends up being whisked off to a private boarding school where she learns how to be a pastry chef. Like I hit a wall with this one. You may or may not have remembered this from my previous thing on anime, but towards the end of the 90s and the start of the 2000s, there is a very distinct style to how most mainstream animes were produced and created, and this is a very good example of how that art style was prevalent. So you would have all the big eyes, the high-pitched voices, the super bright colors. You would also have a distractingly large amount of whimsical elements shown in every episode that sort of detract away from an already skeletal plot. The voice acting isn't really the best either, or very bearable at all. I actually dropped this anime after 3 episodes. I feel bad for not finishing the anime because I do like to try my best to power through it. It's kind of like a respect thing also to just consume the entire product. For someone that's looking for a little bit more of a storyline and getting drawn into the characters, this really isn't the one for me. The last anime is Berserk. The Berserk franchise is actually an award-winning manga series. It was formerly produced as an anime in the 90s and that was the one that gained a lot of traction. It was recently renewed for 2 seasons in 2016 and 2017 by a different production house and a different chief animator. The storyline is extremely fantasy based and action driven. The character development is absolutely immaculate. I might even make another separate video on this because the franchise is just immense, but TLDR, long story short, the character building is incredible, the tension is really there, the story is something that has gripped audiences for pretty much decades. The first anime in the 90s was absolutely fantastic, but I haven't got around to watching that one. The 2016 and the 2017 versions weren't very good at all. You could tell immediately offhand that the production was very low budget, and it was one of those situations where budgets were cut because the people in charge knew that the fan base would come out and support the anime anyways. The CGI was extremely primitive. There was an obscene amount of panning shots that were used that weren't really conducive to telling the story. You would see camera shots go from left to right, up to down, without actually giving you more context as to what's going on in the story or of the character's surroundings. This ended up making for a very nauseating series of fight scenes that we would see in almost every episode, and not a lot of attachment growth for these characters that technically aren't really hard to love. Many people that start watching this anime would already know these characters, and it wouldn't be very hard to build on that sense of familiarity. However, this anime somehow manages to challenge all of that by just touching very briefly on all the different characters and sort of breezing through that character building process that I think is really critical in any successful anime, in my opinion at least. I finished the 2016 one because I wanted to give the anime as much of a chance as possible to turn things around. It did not. And I probably wouldn't touch this franchise again anytime soon. If I revisit it, I would probably revisit the 90s installment first, just because I heard a lot more good things about that one. And that is it! I don't want to sound like I'm just hating on all these different titles, but I hope this sheds some light, because like life, you get some good ones and you get some child molesting ones. This video has gone on way longer than I had hoped for it to, but thank you so much for joining me today. Let me know what you think of these little chats about anime. I do like having this sort of sit down time and take stock of what I've watched. I am dabbling with the idea of doing slightly more in-depth videos where I go into one specific anime and talk about it for a longer period of time and go a little bit more in depth. But let me know what you think, and I will see you guys soon. What was that?